In all the previous videos, we looked at the scenario where one API is trying to invoke other API staying inside a secure resource server, and we saw how to leverage KeyCloak auth server in order to implement authentication and authorization using OAuth2 framework. Now, in this lecture, let's try to understand another scenario where a web application which might be based upon Angular app or React app is trying to invoke an API present inside a secure resource server so that data passed by the resource server can be displayed on the UI. So this is the another scenario that we can focus now and try to understand how it works in this scenario. So the main difference between web application invocation and Postman API invocation is inside web application, we will have an user who enter the credentials, and this user is the resource owner who owns the resources present inside a resource server. My web application will act as a client application like we saw in the OAuth2 framework. And definitely the grant type that we have to follow for this scenario is authorization code grant flow. So let's try to go and revise what is authorization code grant type flow inside OAuth2 framework. Like you can see here, first as an user, I can use a client application. So I can tell to my client application, I want to display my loans details or cards details which are hosted on the resource server. Then my client application will redirect me to authorization server login page where I can enter my username and password along with the client ID. So if my authentication is successful, I will get a authorization code in the return. Now using the authorization code, my client will again have to make a call to auth server by passing client ID and client secret. So if my client secret is valid, I will get a successful access token from the authorization server. Once I get a successful access token from the auth server, then communication between resource server and auth server and client is pretty similar to like what we discussed before. And like you know, here my client and authorization server will interact two times. The very first time, the user will enter his credentials. Along with the user credentials, we should also pass what is the client ID. So once I get authorization code, now using authorization code, I again have to invoke the authorization server API in order to get an access token. This time along with the authorization code, I need to pass client ID and client secret as well. So these two different API calls will bring more security into authorization code grant type compared to implicit grant type. In implicit grant type, everything will be in a single call. There is no need of authorization code, but that is very less secure and prone to security issues. So due to that reason, whenever you have a web application into picture, please make sure you are using authorization code grant type, and this is the most commonly used and standard grant type that we have inside OAuth2 framework. So now we have a clarity that we are going to use OAuth2 code grant type inside our EazyBank application. So here we need to make sure we are creating a new client ID inside KeyCloak server, and definitely we should also create an user details so that he have access to the resource server that we are maintaining in the backend. So let's try to create an client ID and user details inside KeyCloak server in the next lecture. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye.